Islamic terrorism strikes an Egyptian mosque, killing more than 200 people. President Trump talks Turkey, the country, not the food, and plays golf with Tiger Woods. And as Black Friday brings out the shoppers, we look at the battle for customers between traditional stores and e-commerce. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Mike Emanuel. We'll hear from Bret Baier a little later. Militants attacked a crowded mosque in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula today. The death toll is in the hundreds. It is the worst massacre ever of Egyptian civilians by Islamic militants. President Trump calls it a horrible and cowardly attack. Egypt's president vows the terrorists will not go unpunished. Correspondent Connor Powell is following the story from our Middle East newsroom. Hello, Connor.
Mike, in the last few hours, the Egyptian military has launched airstrikes in the Sinai Desert, the first of what is expected to be a series of military responses. Today's attack in Egypt's northern Sinai province appears to have been as well planned and sophisticated as it was deadly. More than 230 people were killed after militants detonated a bomb outside a mosque in the small village of Bir al-Abed. Then, as fleeing worshippers tried to escape, some 40 militants in trucks opened fire, killing dozens more. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who seized power in 2013 with the promise of restoring calm to the country, appeared on state TV tonight and promised security forces would respond forcefully.
The military forces and the civil police will take revenge for our martyrs and bring back security and stability with force in the near future. This is our response. We will respond to this attack with extreme power when confronting these terrorists and infidel thugs.
While President Donald Trump tweeted his support for Egypt and used the attack to press for tighter security at home, saying, quote, "We have to get tougher and smarter than ever before, and we will. Need the wall, need the ban." Today's attack is the deadliest in Egypt's modern history, and it follows a significant increase in militant activity. For 3 years, an ISIS-affiliated group has launched a wave of violence, targeting both small security checkpoints and large religious sites, including the ancient seat of Egypt's Coptic Christian community. The site of today's attack appears to have been chosen not only for its remote location, but also because of the Sufi Muslims who worship there.
The Sufis are anathema to the hardcore ISIS and Al-Qaeda types, the Sunni hardliners. Within Sunni Islam, the Sufis are the mystics, the poets, the most tolerant.
President Sisi has promised countless times to stop terrorism and to protect Egyptians from extremism, but delivering on that promise so far, Mike, has proven to be far more difficult.
Connor Powell in our Middle East newsroom. Connor, thank you very much. There were some very tense moments today in London as a popular transit station was evacuated after reports of gunfire. Shoppers in one of the city's busiest areas scattered in panic while commuters from the Oxford Circus subway station ran into stores for cover. After an hour, police said they had found no sign of gunshots, suspects, or casualties. Business and pleasure today for President Trump at the Winter White House. The first golfer teed it up with one of the greatest ever, Tiger Woods. He also discussed much more serious matters with a key American ally. Correspondent Phil Keating is in South Florida tonight.
President Trump once again beginning his Florida morning this long Thanksgiving holiday weekend, tweeting, this time about foreign policy. We'll be speaking to President Erdogan of Turkey this morning about bringing peace to the mess that I inherited in the Middle East. I will get it all done, but what a mistake in lives and dollars, $6 trillion, to be there in the first place. That $6 trillion figure likely comes from a study by the Watson Institute of International and Public Affairs, accounting for the expense of wars, long-term medical costs, and nation building. According to the Turks, President Erdogan and President Trump discussed recent developments in Syria, bilateral ties, and a summit in Russia's Sochi. Foreign policy analyst Walid Faris says the Middle East is significantly changing, a different region for the Trump administration to work with.
I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and talking about the other countries in the region who have an interest in closing that file with Israel so they could be all together in the Middle East with the United States against the real threat, which is the jihadists and Iran.
Once the president and Congress return to Washington next week, not only is President Trump meeting Tuesday with the Big Four congressional leadership, McConnell, Ryan, Schumer, and Pelosi, to avoid a December government shutdown, Trump will also now attend a Senate GOP policy lunch the same day. And before the night of Thanksgiving had passed, President Trump again showed no thanks for Obamacare, tweeting out one final Thanksgiving dig. Obamacare premiums are going up, up, up. Just as I have been predicting for 2 years, Obamacare is owned by the Democrats, and it is a disaster. But do not worry, even though the Dems want to obstruct, we will repeal and replace right after tax cuts. And there is some pleasure on this White House-described working vacation, and today it happened about 30 miles north of here at the Trump National Golf Club in Jupiter. And what a foursome it was on the links. President Donald Trump golfing with Tiger Woods, Dustin Johnson, the current #1 in the world, as well as PGA pro Brad Faxon. The White House would not let the media shoot any of it, so in the end we have no idea who had the lowest score, but we can probably surmise who did not. Mike.
Phil, you didn't get to drive the cart?
They wouldn't let me.
Our Phil Keating live tonight in South Florida. Phil, many thanks. Well, it looks like a major development tonight in the Russia investigation. There are signs a key figure might have decided to cooperate with the special counsel. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen has details.
Fox News has confirmed that Robert Kellner, the lawyer for former White House National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, has contacted several attorneys engaged with the special counsel, including those representing President Trump, to tell them, as was first reported in the New York Times, that Flynn's legal team can no longer share information with those counsel, a step widely interpreted to mean that Flynn, while not yet facing any formal accusation of wrongdoing, is ready to cooperate with prosecutors.
He also has his son being investigated, and this may be one of the situations where a father will want to save his son. I mean, when you look at Flynn's potential charges, that he failed to register as a foreign agent, that he didn't claim money that he received from Russian entities, I mean, he certainly has some issues.
Jay Sekulow, a member of the Trump legal team, said the prospect of Flynn entering a plea is not unexpected, and added no one should draw the conclusion that this means anything about General Flynn cooperating against the president.
Mike Flynn is a fine person.
Indeed, the Trump team believes any charges against Flynn will likely derive from his lobbying on behalf of Turkey, not from anything relating to Russia. A former prosecutor predicted defense counsel would try to impeach Flynn's credibility as a witness by showing he allegedly lied on federal forms and elsewhere.
To put him on the witness stand against those charges, they're going to need some real corroborating evidence to support his testimony going forward if he agrees to cooperate.
And the president's lawyers say confidently that the electronic evidentiary record, now in the hands of special counsel Mueller, would provide no support for any allegations Flynn might make against the president relating to Russia. But the Mueller team could not have overlooked the Yahoo News report that quoted Flynn telling supporters in May that President Trump had called him on April 25 and urged him to, quote, stay strong. Mike?
James Rosen here in Washington. James, thank you. Now to Black Friday. The people who keep track of such things tell us 164 million Americans will do a little shopping between Thanksgiving and Cyber Monday. But where you shop and how is evolving at a dramatic rate. Correspondent Matt Finn from Chicago's Magnificent Mile tonight on the struggle between the new and old ways of doing business.
For decades, customers have camped out in front of or fought their way into stores for extreme once-a-year deals during the infamous post-Thanksgiving shopping day known as Black Friday. But it seems the sun might be setting on a traditional Black Friday for brick-and-mortar stores as an increasing number of shoppers hop online instead of waiting in line for a doorbuster deal.
I'll probably be shopping online at least 90% this year, 10% in store.
There's traffic, there's crowds, there's waiting in lines. I can get it done in about 30 seconds. I can do it at 11 o'clock at night sitting in my bed.
A survey by the National Retail Federation found that this year, 59% of shoppers plan to shop online, the first time the web is the most popular choice. Last year, in 2016, consumers generated a record $1 billion in online sales from the convenience of their cell phone. Perhaps the greatest recent attack on brick-and-mortar Black Friday sales is the growing options of extreme deals once reserved only for Friday morning. Cyber Monday now offers big online deals on the Monday after Thanksgiving. And some major retailers like Walmart and websites like Amazon now begin sales days or even weeks before Thanksgiving.
The Black Friday sales start, the Sunday, the Saturday before Black Friday. They continue all the way through the week. Thanksgiving Day itself is very busy, and people just get online.
Check out, yes.
Still, in the midst of a historic holiday shopping transition, experts and shoppers agree there is still a demand to buy and return in stores.
I just think it's a lot more fun to shop in stores, especially on Black Friday. It's just a whole different experience.
We haven't really found out what the hybrid of brick and mortar is. There's a need for both. People like to return stuff back to the stores immediately, and that's when sometimes the biggest shopping day of the year for the stores, December 26th.
The holiday shopping season in general off to a promising start. Shoppers spent $640 million online alone by 10 o'clock this morning, according to Adobe Analytics, and more than half of those purchases were made on people's cell phones. Mike.
Matt Finn on Chicago's Magnificent Mile. Matt, many thanks. Markets traded for a half day today. The Dow gained 32. The S&P 500 was up 5. NASDAQ finished ahead 22. Those last two are record closes. Up next, Bret Baier takes us to the demilitarized zone where North meets South Korea. It is one of the most tension-filled places in the world. You'll go there when we come back. Earlier this week, we showed you dramatic video of a North Korean soldier defecting to the South. The images show a Jeep traveling on the road that connects the two countries. Inside, a 24-year-old identified only by his surname of O. He passes a checkpoint and keeps going. The car eventually is disabled. O strikes out on foot as North Korean soldiers fire at him, hitting him 5 times. South Korean troops then crawl to him and drag his body to safety. During President Trump's recent trip to Asia, my colleague Bret Baier was at that very site. Here is his report.
No dictator, no regime, and no nation should underestimate ever American resolve.
The United States, who is the ringleader of the division of our people and the prime obstructor to the reunification, should stop anti-North Korea sanctions.
For all of the tension, all of the intense rhetoric and provocative actions,
they will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
Whatever Trump expected, he will see a response above that. We will control the mentally deranged U.S. dotard with fire.
The standoff between nuclear North Korea and the rest of the world. There is one place where the U.S. and North Korea see eye to eye, or at least face to face. The demilitarized zone, the DMZ, marking the border between North and South Korea, and the armistice agreement struck to pause the Korean War.
I think we always operate at a higher level of tension than, say, the rest of the peninsula, just because it is a pretty strategically important area. And so, based on what's going on outside of our area of operations, nothing really changes for us. We're always ready to, follow the commander's intent of what the chain of command above us asks us to do. Everyone wants to avoid the worst possible scenario. And so even the propaganda, I would say, has been pretty minimal, and it hasn't been overly tense.
Just a few feet from here is North Korea. This is the DMZ, the demilitarized zone. On this side, the South Koreans, the U.S. control. Just a few feet from here, the North Koreans. There was a lot of communication between the two for many years. In fact, they had a phone they'd pick up and they'd answer on the North Korean side. But they stopped answering in 2013. So now, South Korean troops come out every day. They stand here on point. And if there's a message to deliver, they go right to that line, that concrete barrier. That is the line with North Korea. Toes to that concrete, and they yell the message to the North Koreans, at which point they're videotaped. That's the only communication back and forth.
From that building, we have a hotline. You can kind of see the wire draped across to North Korea. It's a ring-down phone. It works, and we test it 4 times a day.
So basically, you pick it up, it rings there.
Yes, sir. They're just not answering it right now. We nicknamed it the Bat Phone because the State Department was up here one time, and I was talking to one of their delegation, and I just said Bat Phone like that. So she went back to Washington, D.C. and sent us the Batman sticker. So the Bat Phone it is. As a matter of fact, we're going to do the midday check right now.
All right.
See?
No answer.
No answer this time. I was kind of hoping they would answer for you, although my mom would never let me live it down. When they don't answer it, we have to come down here on the border here, as Captain was saying. We put toes on the border there, and we shout the messages at them. More times than not, they'll come down and video record the message that they're not getting by just answering the phone. So it makes sense to somebody in North Korea.
It's kind of a strange process, huh?
It is, yes, sir. Some of the stuff after 6.5 decades, we've reduced it to a very elementary level. And that's just to sustain this place as a place that is open for communication and dialogue. However, there haven't been general officer talks up here since 2009. There haven't been actual staff officer level talks since 2013. In front of you, you see the border is represented by these white stakes. It's called the MDL, or Military Demarcation Line. And you'll notice there's no fences on the border. There are no fences on this de facto border across the entire peninsula. The only fences are on the southern boundary and northern boundary of the DMZ, which we pass through, of course, coming up here. So really, this is quite an open area. There's nothing physically keeping somebody from just walking across either way.
But if you did,
you'd probably get shot.
It's estimated there are still some 2 million landmines along the border on the North Korean side. And U.S. commanders say some 70% of the North's military is positioned along its southern border, along the DMZ. As we look out over here, 180 degrees, this is all North Korea.
Absolutely. The way that we're located right now, we're essentially surrounded on 3 sides by North Korea. So the whole JSA, the Joint Security Area, juts out kind of like a finger into North Korea, and so we're under pretty strict observation at all times.
Yeah, he hasn't stopped looking at us.
I don't think he will, sir.
What's the music we hear?
That's North Korean propaganda coming from the propaganda village at Gizendol, which is, you may have seen the big flagpole as we headed up here.
Yeah. So what is it, a song that we're supposed to like North Korea after we hear it? Or?
Absolutely, yeah. Oddly enough, they both had propaganda broadcasts from either side, and it stopped in 2004. But in 2015, there was a provocative landmine incident up here, and it blew off 2 of the 1st Rock Infantry Division soldiers' legs. And ever since then, both sides have been pumping the propaganda again. And it can be lovely music like this, or it can be the, speeches, And North Korea plays it about 20 hours a day.
20 hours a day.
On our side, we do about 2 or 3 hours a day. And it could be anything from news broadcasts to K-pop. I stepped out one time, and they were playing Radio Free America, so I stepped out to Bon Jovi.
Wow.
Unification by Freedom Rock.
Well, if you need a Fox News alert, just let us know.
Right on. You got it.
The sound you hear, well, that's South Korean music, propaganda essentially being blasted back into North Korea. North Korea right over my shoulder. The mountains in the distance, it's estimated that North Korea has about 1,500 artillery pieces positioned in those mountains, hidden. If the U.S. were to attack North Korea in just seconds, those artillery pieces would be rolled out and they'd fire. Their target, 25 miles this way, Seoul. Video of North Korean artillery tests tells the story. Those 1,500 artillery pieces aimed at Seoul are the main considerations and limitations to even small targeted U.S. military action in North Korea. Which brings us back to the time-honored tension in the DMZ, the arcane maneuvers, the spectacle of both sides bringing tour groups to stare at the opposing country.
So they have a tour going on right now, and they're waving at us. And so what is that? I mean, like some...
There's just a commercial tour. It is very likely made up of... I can see some Westerners there. I can also see some Asian folks, a lot of Chinese visitors. They will often have North Koreans come. A lot of times they're party officials and party members, even American visitors, not associated with the government in the military. Prior to September 1st travel ban, American visitors would go over there. In fact, my counterpart over there is called Major Moon, and the kid speaks better English than I do.
Is that right?
Yeah. I think he had an American teacher.
And the blue buildings, built to straddle the border for negotiations that haven't been used for that purpose in more than 4 years.
In February of 2013, North Korea did their third nuclear test. And there was a whole bunch of sanctions laid on them. And so sort of protest to the sanctions, they just... they were very verbose about ripping up the armistice and all the agreements that came after the armistice.
When was the last time the North Koreans were in here?
For this meeting, it was May of 2009. However, the North Koreans are in here every day, 5 or 6 days a week with tours. So much like we have in here right now, we lock the north side door and we'll bring visitors into this area.
So then if they come down, they lock the south side door, and then it's their deal.
That's it. Yes, sir.
So technically the line right here is at this table.
That's it. Yes, sir. And it'll, you follow it out the windows, you see that concrete block that you were mentioning outside. And that has divided the joint security area since right around 1976.
I really believe that it makes sense for North Korea to come to the table and to make a deal that's good for the people of North Korea and the people of the world.
So standing in North Korea, we'll be right back with Special Report after the break.
Law enforcement officers in Texas are mourning the death of a colleague tonight. State Trooper Damon Allen was shot and killed yesterday on Thanksgiving about 90 miles south of Dallas during a traffic stop. Police say Bret Black killed Allen with a rifle as the trooper walked back to his vehicle. Black fled the scene but was later taken into custody. Trooper Allen was married with 3 children. Minnesota Democratic Senator Al Franken admits he crossed a line in the wake of more groping allegations. Franken says in a statement that he's a warm person who hugs people. He says some women found his greetings or embraces inappropriate, and he respects their feelings. A total of 4 women have made accusations against Franken. Franken, of course, made his name as a writer and comic performer. Many of his lawmaker colleagues have made fortunes in other professions. Tonight, correspondent Ellison Barber looks at where some of the money is in the halls of Congress.
My fellow citizens of the world, preserve, protect, and defend.
Mr. President, any final thoughts for the American public before you leave office?
D.C. is a place where history is made.
And God bless the United States of America.
And revered.
General Washington's mortal remains in the marble sarcophagus to the right.
There's power.
On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets.
And money. 3 of the top 5 richest counties in America are in the suburbs of D.C. But what's it like for these guys?
House will be in order.
There are 535 members of Congress, 435 in the House, 100 in the Senate. Rank and file members make $174,000 a year, but most have or had other jobs.
I lost 2 legs and a finger disposing bombs.
I became a doctor to help people.
I have done well in business.
First as the district attorney of San Francisco.
I was starting to invent things.
According to data from 2015 filings recently analyzed and released by the Center for Responsive Politics, Congressman Darrell Issa is the richest member of Congress with an estimated net worth of $330 million. The California Republican founded a company called Directed Electronics in the 80s, and it became one of the biggest manufacturers of anti-theft car devices.
Protected by Viper. Stand back.
After Issa comes Democrat Representative Jared Polis with an estimated net worth of $313 million. Then it's Senator Mark Warner with $238 million. The Virginia Democrat invested early in cell phones.
You turn off your cell phones when a speaker is speaking. Forget about that with me. You can turn them back on. You hear an annoying sound, I hear cha-ching, cha-ching.
When it comes to the richest members of Congress, 7 out of the top 10 are Democrats. When it comes to the poorest, 5 are Democrats, 5 are Republicans. Republican David Valadao of California is reportedly the poorest, $24 million in debt. Valadao is a dairy farmer and has a number of loans for land and farming equipment. He once told the LA Times the financial disclosure reports, which members of Congress are required to fill out, don't always give an accurate representation of a member's wealth. The Center for Responsive Politics regularly releases this analysis because they say it matters. People should know if their elected officials have ties to industries receiving, say, government contracts. Mike?
Ellison Barber here in Washington tonight. Ellison, thanks. Tonight, we continue our look at major infrastructure issues across the country. Correspondent Douglas Kennedy takes us to a region known for devastating flooding that has a $10 billion plan to do something about it.
Living in this area, storm surge is a humongous threat.
Ariel Stimson lives right off of Galveston Bay in Texas, where she was during Hurricane Harvey. So living out here, there's really nowhere to go.
No, if you don't evacuate, there's no way out.
She took this drone video of homes and neighborhoods flooded.
It was a kind of crazy panic feeling because there was water all around us.
Water all around. It's become a regular occurrence for towns along Galveston Bay, which have been flooded multiple times over the past 20 years. The problem is here at the tip of Galveston Island. Galveston Bay is actually open and exposed right here to the Gulf of Mexico. Meaning during a storm, all the storm surge from the Gulf makes its way unimpeded into Galveston Bay. And it doesn't just threaten homes and neighborhoods. The bay actually funnels into the port of Houston, endangering a major population center, as well as Houston's oil and petrochemical infrastructure.
Water is a hugely powerful force.
Some say Houston has to move out of the way of that water. This man wants to move that water out of the way of Houston. So your idea is to limit the amount of water here that can get into Galveston Bay during a storm event?
Absolutely. And then causing significant impacts further up the Gulf.
Colonel Lars Zetterstrom is commander of the Army Corps of Engineers in Galveston and is proposing building 2 giant movable gates as storm surge barriers. It's similar to ones in the Netherlands that protect Rotterdam Port from the North Sea. If approved by Congress, the gates would be open for ship traffic, but would close during big weather events like Harvey. These are massive structures.
Absolutely. They would be gigantic structures. In the case of the structure that's being proposed here at the end of Galveston Island, it would be the largest navigation structure constructed in the world to date.
The total cost would be $10 billion. But to Stimson, it would all be worth it, as long as you don't have to worry about water ever again.
Yeah, it's absolutely worth it in the end. I mean, it's going to cost a lot of money in the beginning, but it's going to save a lot of lives.
It's also going to save a lot of infrastructure. On Galveston Bay, Douglas Kennedy, Fox News.
Next up, our Whatever Happened To series looks at the Greek financial crisis. Tonight, we bring you another installment of our series, Whatever Happened To? Clara Gums asked on Facebook, whatever happened to Greece and the bailout? Clara, your answer tonight from senior foreign affairs correspondent Amy Kellogg.
This Athens tour bus operator doesn't wear rose-tinted shades, but after a crisis that hit boiling point 2 years ago, he says Greece has finally turned a corner.
2015-17 is a year that left the crisis behind. This year, the things around Athens and Greece generally are getting better day by day.
Tourism is Greece's strongest industry, and the end of protests has meant the return of tourists in large numbers. Greece is good value. Competitor destinations like Turkey and Egypt feel increasingly less secure, making Greece more attractive. Hotel owners are positive, but say the increased taxes that came with the bailout mean that while business is good, profits are still hard to come by.
It's not easy, and I mean it when I say we're not going to be making any money, but we have seen bad scenarios in other sectors, so we're happy we made it that far.
Greece has come a long way from these scenes just a few years back. Socialist Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras had to do a U-turn on his promise to free Greece from the yoke of austerity mandated by the European Union creditors. Government controls were loosened, competition in the private sector championed, and Greece is finally in a state of growth, albeit around 1%. 1 in 5 are still officially out of job, and there's been significant brain drain. But Greece was finally able to borrow money this summer on international markets. Like those in tourism, economic experts are trying to stay positive.
Greece within Europe has a bright future. I think that it was smart from them not to exit Europe in 2015. This in the long term will help Greece. Greece was able to go back and borrow in international market because it's part of the Eurozone.
It's been said that Greece was the first big crisis the European Union had. Since then, Brexit and Catalonia may have eclipsed the Greek tragedy, or at least grabbed the headlines, as Greece slowly pulls itself out of the doldrums. In Milan, Amy Kellogg, Fox News.
Amy Kellogg on the Greek recovery. The prison sentence for former Olympic runner Oscar Pistorius has been doubled. South Africa's Supreme Court of Appeal made the ruling today. Pistorius was convicted of murder in the death of his supermodel girlfriend. His original sentence of 6 years was mocked as shockingly lenient by the court. His new sentence is 13 years and 5 months. He will be eligible for parole in 2023. Zimbabwe's new president is vowing to hold democratic elections next year. Emerson Mnangagwa replaces Robert Mugabe, who was forced out after 37 years of rule. The new president's also promising to tackle corruption and reach out to the world. Up next, the panel on President Trump's messages on the day after Thanksgiving.
They'd have Flynn twisted into a legal pretzel. He is DOA. Done. Now they want to move up to a higher target. There are only, in my mind, 3 higher targets. The president, his son, or Jared Kushner.
Flynn has been possibly labeled as a spy, somebody who has misled the White House, somebody who has lied to Pence, somebody who maybe can't be trusted. Maybe he's distancing himself in order to protect Trump.
People like Paul Manafort, Rick Gates, Mike Flynn, if they have done something wrong, they should be held accountable. But that's where it ends, because there is no culpability or liability to the president.
With that, let's bring in our panel. Matthew Continetti, editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon. Sarah Westwood, White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Charles Lane, opinion writer for the Washington Post. And Nicholas Johnston, editor-in-chief of Axios. And as a Greek American, I feel obligated to say Axios means you are worthy.
Absolutely.
Which tonight, I believe, means you are worthy to be on the panel. So welcome to all of you. New York Times headline today. Let's take a look at it. A split from Trump indicates that Flynn is moving to cooperate with Mueller. Nick, what do we make of this?
This is classic case building by a federal prosecutor. You start on the outside and work your way in. We've already seen people in the campaign, Manafort, Gates, Papadopoulos taken before. Now we've moved inwards to Flynn, who was in the administration. So now the investigation has moved inside the White House. Another key thing to note, that Mike Flynn's son is involved in this. And I think that may be very much a motivating thing that Flynn is thinking about, how we can possibly make a deal with Mueller to protect his son.
Chuck, what's your read on what we're getting out of the Mueller probe? We're getting little bits and pieces, but there's probably plenty we don't know, right?
It's moving quickly at this point. I have a feeling that, if you look sort of below Trump, who's the highest ranking figure in all, I guess you would have to say Mike Flynn, because he was going to be National Security Advisor. He actually had a cup of coffee in that job. And, you know, whatever there's going to be to get, most of it might come from the cooperating testimony of somebody with that higher rank.
A key national security Republican on the Hill has his concerns. Let's take a listen.
I don't know what to make of it. It may be minor, it may be big. It's hard for me to tell kind of this day-by-day play. I'm concerned about the leaks coming out of the special counsel. That doesn't mean this information isn't relevant. But at the same time, I think Americans need to sit back and say, and trust that the special counsel is getting the information he needs, and that we're going to find out it may just not be as quick as everybody wants.
Sarah, your thoughts on where we are with the Mueller probe and what Congressman Kinzinger is saying about it?
Well, looking back to the Hillary Clinton email probe, when then Director Comey of the FBI started interviewing high-ranking people in Hillary Clinton's orbit, that was the end of the email probe. They interviewed Hillary Clinton a few days later. They shut down the investigation. And we do know through leaks or because of defense attorneys are being notified that some of the high-ranking people in President Trump's orbit are starting to go into interviews. That could very well signal that the investigation is indeed winding down. Also, it could mean that Mueller and his team finds out new information from those interviews and goes down different lines of inquiry. So there's really no way to tell exactly where we are.
And of course, things are so polarized these days that some people say, oh, this is the hugest nothing burger out there. And other people say, oh, it's getting close to the president's inner circle. Matthew, your read?
Well, it is getting close to the president's inner circle. I'm struck by how wide-ranging the Mueller probe is, right? I mean, Manafort Gates indicted for lobbying violations, basically. Papadopoulos has the guilty plea for a false statement to the FBI in the course of his interviews. Michael Flynn under investigation for a variety of things, including lobbying he did for Turkey. Remember, the special counsel and the investigations are about Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. We still haven't really seen much evidence of that from the Mueller probe.
Matthew, I think you might have helped produce the show. We were going to talk Turkey as well. So let's take a look at the president's tweet from earlier today on Turkey, saying we'll be speaking to President Erdogan of Turkey this morning about bringing peace to the mess that I inherited in the Middle East. I will get it all done, but what a mistake in lives and dollars. $6 trillion to be there in the first place. That $6 trillion figure that President Trump references appears to come from a November 8th Wall Street Journal story on a new study which calculates the cost to U.S. taxpayers for the post-9/11 wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, and Syria is about $5.6 trillion. Matthew, is this a sign the president would like to basically get out of the Middle East region?
I think we have plenty of signs that that's the case, right? Trump Twitter is the authentic president. You get the real insight into what he's thinking. And, of course, the problem with extricating ourselves from the Middle East, as we're in the process of doing, especially now that victory over ISIS seems imminent, is that we're no longer in the driver's seat. And right now it's the Saudis and the Crown Prince there and the Iranians and Vladimir Putin who are dictating events in the Middle East. And that leaves America in, I think, an exposed position.
Sarah, what are you hearing from folks over at the White House about President Trump and the Middle East at this stage?
Well, what might explain the timing of President Trump talking to Erdogan, focusing on the Middle East right now during the Thanksgiving holiday, is that Vladimir Putin in Russia, the Iranians, and Turkey right now are huddling with the Syrians. They're hammering out a peace deal that doesn't really involve U.S. input and that keeps Bashar al-Assad in power. That's not something the U.S. wants. So that could explain why President Trump is focusing on it right now. He's reportedly polling support from the Syrian Kurds. That's something Turkey wants. So wading deeper into this conflict to try to prevent Russia from dictating the terms of peace in Syria now that it looks like the conflict is winding down.
The commander-in-chief talked about success against ISIS in his teleconference with the troops yesterday. Let's take a listen to that.
What you're doing with ISIS is, again, being talked about. We're being talked about again as an armed forces. We're really winning. We know how to win. But we have to let you win. They weren't letting you win before. They were letting you play even. We're letting you win.
Chuck, your reaction to what we're hearing from the commander-in-chief?
It seemed like he was reading some talking points there. Of course, this is one of his talking points, is that I'm going to unleash the military and change all these rules of engagement that allegedly under the Obama administration were restraining the U.S. military's ability to really knock out ISIS. But the truth of the matter is that ISIS has been deprived of almost all of its territory now in Iraq and Syria, and seems to have been driven at least out of the presence that it had in those areas that made it seem like almost a state within a state. Having said that, it seems like on the other big issue of whether Bashar al-Assad remains in power in Syria, he's preparing to capitulate on that. He is essentially allowing Russia and Iran to win that war on behalf of their ally in that region, and the withdrawal of support from the Kurds, who had helped us liquidate ISIS, is really significant in that regard. It does show what a different kind of Republican politics this is from what we had under George W. Bush. And Donald Trump was a dissenter from the Iraq War, and he's following up on that.
Nick, let me give you a chance for a quick word.
I think the point on Assad is dead on. This is a big shift from prior administrations, from the Obama administration, which famously drew that red line that Assad needs to go. Trump has not been saying that at all, and as everyone said, Putin is now, I think, steering things in Syria. Another key point from the White House statement that they put out about the Erdogan call earlier, it's because we beat ISIS in Raqqa, the president says, is why that support for the Kurd militias are being pulled back.
All right, let's switch gears for a moment, talk about what's going to be going on in this building when lawmakers come back next week. Tax reform. President Trump has a meeting with the Big Four leaders on Capitol Hill on Tuesday. Then he'll try to rally Senate Republicans on Tuesday at lunch to try to get tax reform across the finish line. Any predictions, panel?
4 weeks to go, there's a lot to do. I think tax reform will be the first thing clearly up next week. There's a lot of movement, a lot of reporting we're going to start doing on Monday to see where some of these 6 or 7 senators who have been wobbling on tax reform are going to go, particularly on the deficit, on Obamacare. And then I'll be looking for the government shutdown. Does that get blown up by adding things like children's health care or Dreamers?
What about the Dreamers? Are the Democrats going to insist on that, Chuck, being in some kind of year-end deal?
Wow. You mean to avoid a government shutdown? Yeah. Well, that's probably what they're going to talk about with the president. Much more than tax reform, I think. They're going to talk about avoiding that government shutdown. And remember, the last time there was a potential government shutdown, he cheerfully said, hey, I cut a deal with Chuck and Nancy. So they're probably thinking, okay, maybe we can get something this time, too.
Sarah, folks at the White House feeling optimistic tax reform will get done in short order?
On the surface, they're projecting optimism that this will go through. Certainly, they are doing everything they can to try to push it through, but at least a half dozen senators are on the fence about this tax reform plan, and I think the White House is willing to give up just about anything to get tax reform through. They don't care if the individual mandate repeal ends up being in it. They don't care if they tinker with the top rates. As long as the corporate tax rate stays where it is and it can benefit the middle class nominally in some way, then they're going to just push as hard as they can to get it through. It's hard to see President Trump and Mitch McConnell remaining buddies like we saw in the Rose Garden last month. If this didn't go through, it's really hard to see President Trump and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's relationship ever recovering from that.
Matthew, do they get it done? Because in December there may be some things that Republicans don't like that they have to vote on just to get across the finish line.
That's right. I think there's a lot of confidence among Senate Republicans precisely because they want to go home for Christmas with having accomplished one of the president's major legislative aims, and that is taxes. On the other hand, there are a lot of equities that need to be balanced with this government funding. I mean, not just DACA, not just the children's health insurance program, also defense spending. Right. And Senator John McCain, he's making it a legacy issue to spend as much money on defense as he can.
Panel, thank you very much. When we come back, this week's notable quotables. Finally tonight on this Friday, the week's notable quotables.
The Judge Moore you knew 2 weeks ago is the same Judge Moore.
He denies it. I don't know them.
You always have bad apples everywhere.
I don't think members should be able to camouflage payments.
The KPA violated the armistice agreement by 1, firing weapons across the MDL, and 2, by actually crossing the MDL.
Today, the United States is designating North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism.
It just points out how little they care for the value of human life.
All he wanted to do was just help people and help the world and try to make a difference.
They cannot just decide to take this breach and hide it behind the scenes, and then whatever it's convenient for them, it's actually to reveal it.
We show the world is the fact that we will keep going and that our great annual events that symbolize everything about this city we're proud of, that they will never be changed.
I guess I should take that as a compliment that I look like a villain in a great, successful James Bond movie.
I tell you what, I say thank you when I see something. I don't thank you because just people because it's talking and say I did this, I did that. So if the president invited you to the White House, would you say thank you then? Heck yeah, if he invited me to the White House.
Drumstick, you are hereby pardoned.
Thanksgiving week. Thanks for watching Special Report. I'm Mike Emanuel. Good night from Washington.